Senators.
How are you?
Okay,
Better for seeing you.
okay, so let's see where we are right now. We have, I'm looking at the agenda, but I'm trying to go back to the screen here. We still don't have, you know what I'll do? Why don't I let Chairman Marcotte explain the gap funding bill, which I understand has been adopted by appropriations, but not the full House yet. Is that where things are?
Correct, yeah. Next, I believe it'll be on the floor Thursday and Friday.
Okay, so I don't want to keep you any longer than you need to be. So maybe you can go through it in, us legislator terms, and then we'll have David Hall walk us through the specifics of the wording.
Sure.
How does that sound?
Sure, be glad to. Thank you, Senator Sorokin, members of the committee. For the record, Representative Michael Marcotte from Coventry, Chair of House Commerce and Economic Development. I also brought with me Vice Chair Charlie Kimball.
Good morning.
As well.
Good morning.
And Charlie had worked a lot on this bill, and he can fill in gaps that I may miss. During our work on this whole gap funding issue, which started with budget adjustment, we looked at it for a couple of days and took testimony, but this was a pretty hard concept to try to understand and figure out, because we're talking about businesses that that receive no funding at all, and the reasons for that are they either started their business within the last quarter of 2019, so they didn't have a full quarter that they could look back on, or they started in 2020 and any time from there on. So there was no way for them to access any of the federal funding or any of the funding that we had with CRF dollars. So we did not at the time recommend appropriations put that into budget adjustment, and we continued to work on it. We put a lot of time into it, and the biggest questions for us was how do we make those determinations? I think that we all realize that the majority of the businesses that we're talking about, where it's easy to understand that they did have a loss, would be in the hospitality sector. So any new bar, any new restaurant that opened or was taken over, was purchased, or any hotel, wedding venue, any type caterers, though it's pretty easy to understand that during this COVID time that they will have some serious issues of loss of revenue. We finally came down to the idea that we need to focus on those businesses. The agency wanted to also look at businesses that received de minimis amounts of funding, either PPP1 or P2 or the EIDL programs, or even in the recovery grants. We wanted to make sure we prioritize the businesses that receive nothing at all first. So in the language, you'll see that priority is for the first 30 days, that only those businesses could receive any funding at all. If there is money left over, we don't believe there will be, but then they could, then the agency could, and still prioritizing every week the businesses that receive no funding, could actually get some of that money out to the other businesses with the minimum amounts. Charlie, I'll let you, if I've missed anything.
Sure, I can throw in a couple things. One of the things that we wanted to be sure of is that a business had applied for all the federal programs that were available. And as the chairman mentioned, there's PPP 1 and 2. So the Paycheck Protection Program was set up in 2020, and then it was renewed in December through the Economic Aid Act for seriously or severely hit small businesses, nonprofits, and shuttered venues. So that then put another chunk of money into the into the mainstream for financial institutions to lend out, and worked with a lot of community financial institutions first to give them the priority. But from that pot of money, there are businesses that have now applied for the first draw on a Paycheck Protection Program loan or a second draw. So since it was introduced in January, 4,480 businesses in Vermont have received approximately $374 million in PPP loans. So part of it was because they weren't sure they were eligible before, or they didn't think they'd need it. But as this continues on, it is obvious that they did. So then who's missed? Who's in that gap that we're talking about? How big is it? And that's, I think, some of the questions you may have around that. And so it's businesses that did not have that operating loss between 19 and 20 to compare to. And the second draw PPP loans have a requirement that you have to show a 25% decrease in revenues for any one quarter in 2020 compared to 2019. You had to have been in operation before February 15th, 2020. If you had an operating loss in 2019 of any kind, then you don't qualify for a PPP loan in 2021 because you don't have that year to compare to. So how big is the universe of these businesses? Honestly, we don't know. We're not sure. We do know that that when we had those economic recovery grants that were administered by the Agency of Commerce Community Development in December, when they were dispersed in December, there was still $30 million of unmet need, because businesses that applied had a calculation, if you remember, according to the factor. And so there was, they received about 41 to 42%, somewhere in there, of their unmet need. But there's still $30 million left there. That's one thing. Anecdotally, there have been a lot of businesses who have opened in 2020, had the misfortune of having everything in progress, so their opening day was during a pandemic, or they purchased a business in 2020. And we had a lot of testimony from businesses that did that. So they were not eligible for PPP loans, or someone had a 20% decrease in revenues. So we don't know exactly how many businesses fall into this. ACCD is confident that there is more than $10 million in need outstanding. So we try to narrow the eligibility and try to prioritize those businesses that would be eligible for this type of loan. And we turned into prioritization according to 6 different factors. And I just want to share those with you, if I may. What we're talking about is prioritizing those businesses to the degree to which, one, they were unable to operate during the pandemic or during this time because of the governor's orders. So if someone was able to operate, that was different than someone unable to operate. Number 2 is they had to have suffered an operating loss, or this is a priority, not just a financial loss, which could be a decrease in revenue, but an actual loss of money from operating their business. Third factor to consider is, have they received state, federal grants or forgivable loans? The fourth factor is, will the funds help them to reopen or modify their operations to continue to be open? The fifth one is will they use the funds to cover fixed operating expenses until the declared state of emergency is lifted? And the last is, how much is the business, does it constitute their primary source of household income? So the agency has agreed to take those into consideration, to use that in kind of a totality of the circumstances to prioritize grants within this $10 million. I think that's, Mr. Jay, and we put into place all the same criteria from the economic recovery grant bills that we passed last year, they have to be domiciled in Vermont. They have to have either be open or have a reasonable plan to reopen their business, and so on and so forth. So that's some of the description of what we're looking at.
Thank you, representatives. Just a couple of questions before we move on to David. Is the 7 criteria you mentioned, is that for the second tier of monies? Is the first tier exclusively for 30 days to businesses that didn't qualify for anything else or opened or were purchased too late to get into the programs?
Yeah, that 30 days is really for businesses that haven't received anything. So they get that priority for 30 days. And even after that 30 days is over, the way we've discussed it with the Agency of Commerce Community Development, still those businesses that didn't receive anything, even after the 30 days, maybe they missed it, maybe they were asleep, who knows, then those will still be first if they didn't receive anything. But then the other 6 criteria are really to be used as prioritizing those applicants.
You know, I haven't gotten too deep into this yet, but on the surface, I think you'd have to admit that is a huge task for the agency to take those 6 factors and weight them with any certainty. And how do you envision what the size of the grant will be if you look at those 7 criteria?
So we did put in the size of the grant to be equal to 3 months of fixed operating expenses. That is really mortgage, interest on the commercial property. It could be rent, utilities, including telecommunications expense, insurance. So we did limit the grant size to that, or $150,000, or whichever is less. So it's to kind of cram that down into what that amount is. We looked at different amounts, grant amounts, and we settled on that 150. If you remember, the economic recovery grant started out at 50,000, then they were increased to 150, then they were increased to 300,000. So we know that we're not going to be able to meet the needs of those businesses that are very large with this program. This is really designed to meet the needs of those small businesses.
So I was glad to hear you say something about it's not solely based on revenue loss, and it may be more based upon economic loss or profits. But does every business, no matter how small of a loss they may have, at least qualify for the 3 months grant, even if they don't have that need there?
Even if they don't have the need.
Well,
I'm not sure how else to think that question. I don't have an immediate answer. Mike, do you have something there?
but Michael, why would they apply if they didn't have the need?
Well, one of the issues last time around was, you know, the use of the word need. I think everybody thought that was a shorthand version of what was going on, but didn't accurately reflect what was going on because they were just looking at loss in revenue. No one looked at changes in cost, labor, cost of food, all the stuff that was reduced during the pandemic or the shutdown. So it was poor nomenclature, I thought, in terms of everybody thinks need, they think stress, they think loss, but that might not be the case if you just compare one quarter of revenue to last year's quarter
Right.
of revenue. But it almost, I mean, there is one category in here about something have suffered economic hardship due to COVID somewhere in there. And
Mhm.
I guess that's the category. I don't know how you measure that. I don't know what, I mean, a lot of this seems to, at least in the second group, is going to fall to the discretion of the agency and guidelines that they come up. I don't know whether they're going to come up with a point system or rating system or what. I mean, we're going to have the commissioner in later this morning so we can ask those kinds of questions of what they're thinking.
But Michael, I think that one of the pluses in the effort from the House is the focus on operating loss. which makes I think, a fairly substantial difference.
Certainly prioritizing it. You know,
Yeah.
we had testimony from businesses that said that they were unable to achieve their financial goals because of the pandemic. And for us, that was not that
Yeah.
motivating, saying, so you didn't hit your targets because of the pandemic. Well, we're sorry about that, but we really want to prioritize those businesses that had a loss.
Yeah. Right. And operating versus just, revenue. Yeah. I think this is, I just want, Charlie, if you'd be kind enough just to, I'm pretty clear on all the priorities except the fifth one, which was the fixed operating loss. Could you just restate number 5, the fixed operating loss priority?
And that is more in terms of the factors that we wanted them to incorporate. They're
Right.
unable to operate. They suffered an operating loss. Have they received any grant funds or forgivable loans yet? Will they use the funds to reopen or modify the operation? Will they use the funds to cover their fixed operating expenses? And to the degree to which the business is their primary source of income. So those are all priorities. So in terms of calculating, do you mean, Senator, to calculating the amount of the grant, or?
No, I just was, that's fine. I thought that your 6th one about prioritizing that it be the primary source of income was actually very important, because that it might not be, but it's important that it be. I think that's a great addition.
We wanted to stay away from a hard and fast number, and the agency can talk to this about whether or not it was more than 30% of their household income. You know, so only businesses that generated that much. As we know, many Vermonters have 2 or 3 different things going on to pay their bills. They could be working part-time, and they could be they have a gig doing part-time contracting somewhere else, and some actually have 3. So they could be substantial for their household. So it's again talking about what that is as a factor to consider,
Right.
not dispositive, but a factor.
So looking at, I'll get you to a second, Senator Rahm, and looking at the back end of this, what is in the legislation to assure that the money is used to get a business back on its feet?
So it still has to have a good faith operating plan or a good faith plan to reopen if it's currently closed. And then looking at those factors again, trying to understand if the grant is going to get them to the point of being able to survive once the governor's order to remain closed is lifted, or the restrictions.
Do you get into asking what that might look like? We sort of had that requirement in the last recovery grants too. So what did the department do to make sure that it was a good faith and it was possible? And was there any follow-up checking to be done? Was there a narrative that had to be produced? Were there any numbers showing, or the specific plan? I mean, we can ask that question of the department when they come in later this morning, but I was wondering if you know, or Mike knows, what is required of people who are applying to show that they got a shot. They want to do it, and they got a shot at this, realistic shot at reopening with this money.
I think Joan will be able to answer that better, honestly, as to whether or not there was an attestation involved as to how they were using the funds, and giving the department or the agency the ability to go back and audit to see how they had used the funds. And I know they have reached back to a number of businesses to figure out, did you do what you say you're going to do? But I can't speak to the number.
Okay. Did the committee, somewhere along the line, I heard that the auditor wanted to be specifically authorized to audit this program. I'm not sure how that works, but would you have any objection with that?
I think we have in the language, hang on, sorry, Senator, let me just check the language, that with an audit function, and we borrowed some of the language from, I think Senator Brock suggested this before, establish procedures to ensure that grant awards comply with the requirements of this section. The state maintains adequate records to demonstrate compliance with the section. Establish procedures to prevent, detect, and mitigate fraud. So there is no specific mention of the state auditor in there, but that does require the maintenance of records. So I imagine by implication that gives the auditor the ability to audit those records.
Okay. Senator Rahm, did you have a question?
Well, I did. Well, first of all, Nathan, I don't know where Senator Clarkson's looking. I couldn't find under today's date or bills the sort of language that we're looking at. Maybe it was in an email, but it'd be great if it could be posted. And I was wondering, my question is, what I wasn't sure I heard is if you were ineligible if you've received loans, because I just feel like some of those, like the idle advance, et cetera, have been somewhat predatory in nature. And if someone's just received a loan that they're really kind of underwater on, are they ineligible for this?
Yeah, no. So it specifically calls out PPP, economic injury disaster grants, the advances, which are really grants. They were made, amended by the Consolidated Appropriations Act, which is part of the act that was passed on December 27th of 2020. So they have to be deemed ineligible for those programs. If they borrow money from their local bank or Joey down the street, that doesn't disqualify them from this.
Okay, but also the recent idle advance is structured as a loan. So you're...
Yeah, perhaps the commissioner can speak to it, because there's an idle loan and an idle grant, but they're also limited to where you can get those.
Right, but they're calling idle advance. They're misrepresenting it. I think it's actually a very predatory offering, because idle advance is a loan, and a lot of people are experiencing it that way. So I've been talking to Tom Lozon about this and others, but I think we just have to be really clear about eligibility, because some of these programs look like a grant and function more like a loan for a lot of businesses.
So this is, I think we've now bounced around in terms of the funding sources here, but now it's all general fund, and there are obviously a lot of demands for general fund monies. And I'm concerned where the $10 million figure came from. It could be higher, it could be lower, but I've heard something about a number of rooms and meals tax licenses applied for as being, I don't know how that necessarily transfers into 10 million, but Representative Kimball, I heard you say something about like there were $30 million in unmet need in the last program, which, as we talked about, unmet need is not I don't think the best indicator as that's defined, but aren't that $30 million unneeded, even if you consider that need, isn't that basically for businesses that are ineligible for this $10 million?
It's not clear that they would be ineligible for the second round of PPP loans just by that. So the business has to produce documentation that they were either found ineligible or that from a financial advisor, they were determined that it wouldn't make sense to even apply for the grant because they're ineligible.
I thought, if I may, and we don't need to get too much into the weeds here, but I thought this $30 million of unmet need were unmet need in our economic recovery grant program. And people who got economic recovery grants previously from us are ineligible to participate in this $10 million. Do I have that wrong?
So the litmus test for this is they have to first be found ineligible for any of those federal programs. So, and then the priority is those businesses who haven't received anything. So is it possible that someone could have received an economic recovery grant and then be eligible for some of this $10 million? by definition, I believe the answer is yes. Would they be at the bottom of the requirement? Most likely. So Joan can speak more to that, but in terms,
Do you feel they should be at the bottom? I mean, I don't think they're at the bottom now. You have 7 factors in there that the administration can do almost anything they want with. And if we're trying to get to the point where we're saying, no, you got some money in economic recovery grants, we want to focus it on people that haven't gotten any money yet. You're opening the door at this point to revisiting whether the department feels that those grantees have gotten enough.
well, there's 2 parts. One is that the first 30-day period is for those who haven't received any money whatsoever from any grant programs.
Right.
The second is there is that factor in there that says the degree to which you've received any kind of grants from federal or state sources, including the economic recovery grants.
Okay.
So those are all part of it. And going back to the question though about, where did the $10 million figure come from, right? The $30 million was what was unmet need. Is that even though the number of applications for new trust tax accounts for those who would pay rooms and meals, sales and use tax was 430 so far for the year, you can't really use that number. It's not a really good number because somebody might have filed a tax application in 2019 and opened their business in 2020. So that's almost neither here nor there, but it does, what it only shows is the decrease in number of applications over previous years, showing what the economic impact is. I mean, that's of the number of businesses that would open in 2020 versus any previous year. So there's a decrease there. But then going back to your question, is somebody going to be eligible for this, for a slice of the $10 million who has already received some financial assistance? I would say they are at the bottom of the pile. Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you. As you probably know, what we're trying to do here is just make a recommendation to our appropriations committee on expediting or advancing one-time general funds, and they want an answer for us in a couple of days. So we haven't gotten into the detail as much as clearly your committee has. So, and it's complicated stuff. So, we appreciate your time. We may have been given a couple more days, so we may have further follow-up questions for you, but I really appreciate you taking the time to be with us, and we'll hear from David and he'll walk us through the actual language at this point. And then we'll also be hearing from Joan, so you might want to listen in, but that's where we are for this morning, unless anybody else. Senator Clarkson.
Yeah, thank you guys. So you're on the 10 million, what you're calling your gap funding bill is what I think we're calling the fast track one-time money bill. I wish we all had a consistent term. Is this the only fast track one-time money financial investment that the House Commerce Committee is making?
For House Commerce, yes and no. We recommended this to be fast-tracked, but in our letter to appropriations, we have endorsed a number of programs that were suggested by the administration, including an investment in VOREC grants and also in the monies to increase access to state lands because those monies could be put to use right away. There'd be the number of people that have actually gone and utilized outdoor recreation activities. And then there's also, I think they were looking at some other things for the Working Lands Enterprise Board and getting those grants out right away. So that was being considered by the Appropriations Committee, is to try to fast track that as those elements as well.
And I'm curious because we're considering Brownfields, which is, I think, a very important one ASAP. Did you discuss that, Brownfields?
We discussed it in great detail. Yes, the $25 million between ACCD and DEC. As to looking at the different programs, the 92 projects that DEC has identified throughout the state that could be eligible for some of the revolving funds, but those funds are really earmarked 50 to 60% of them for 3 major projects. So we supported that as a committee and are behind it, but we did not, Mike, we didn't recommend it to be fast tracked, I don't believe.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Well, just for the record, we'll hear more about that. But along the concept of shovel ready now, we were also asked the agency to come back, said, do you have any that fall into that category? Because why wait till July if we can pick up 3 more months here, if we know we're going to fund it anyhow? So,
Sure.
Okay. Thank you very much. There's so much here, but let's move on to David Hall, if we could.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, everybody.
Hi, David. Could you pull the gap funding bill? I guess it's the same thing that wound up in what appropriations as approved. Could you pull that up on the screen and walk us through that?
Yes.
And-
So are you seeing this on your screen?
I am.
Yeah,
So,
and when is this expected on the floor of the House?
Thursday, Friday, I believe.
Okay, thanks.
So I have pulled this up from the House Committee on Appropriations committee page. The draft that House Appropriation passed added one piece to this bill as it was passed out of Commerce. And I did not write that or this whole bill, just this section. So I don't actually have a Word document that I could send to you. But if you go to the Committee on Appropriations committee page, you can access this as voted. So you'll see here, this is right now called GAP Economic Recovery Grants. They are FY21 one-time funds. The amount is $10 million from the general fund in FY21 to ACCD to provide GAP economic recovery grants to eligible businesses pursuant to this act. You'll see in 2 that the agency may use not more than 5% of the appropriated funds for the costs of administration, including technical assistance and guidance concerning potential eligibility for federal programs.
How about this program?
Well, yeah, I mean, yes, that's, I think, viewed as cost of administration, not only the technical aspects of the workflow and, the people with whom the agency works, but also to the extent necessary, technical assistance, whether it be on a particular business's financials or as part of the eligibility, a review of whether or not you're actually eligible and should be applying for the federal programs first. Recognizing that 5% of 10 million is a fair amount of money for cost of administration. The House Commerce Committee was pretty concerned about people who may not have either the technical or financial sophistication or necessarily the existing relationships with either financial institutions or other professionals to be able to procure an opinion on their eligibility. Some people might still need help with the forms or with the financial records, et cetera. So that's where they landed, 5% for cost of administration that would include technical assistance.
Okay.
So under B here, eligibility, to be eligible for a grant, you have to meet these criteria. The first 4 of these are taken directly from your previous legislation on the CARES Act funding. So first, you have to either be domiciled or have a primary place of business in Vermont. Second, the business is organized and operated either on a for-profit or nonprofit basis. It does include sole proprietors. As I said a number of times in commerce, this really is the entire universe of businesses It's here as much as anything just to confirm to the world, to the many, many people who've had questions. Do sole proprietors count? Does an LLC count? Does a nonprofit count? The answer is yes. So really, this is just a list of basically all the business organizational forms we have in the state. And it's to just be clear that all those different types of entities are eligible. And again, that is brought forward from S350 and its subsequent amendment in H966. Under 3, the business has to either be open at the time of application or closed for business due to COVID-19 and has a good faith plan for reopening. 4, the business has suffered an economic loss due to the COVID-19 public health emergency. So bear in mind that these are eligibility criteria. So this is the universe of businesses that could possibly apply. You've already discussed, prioritization factors below. We'll get into those, but the threshold for the S350 H966, the CARES Act itself, pretty general. You had to have suffered an economic loss due to COVID-19. That's kind of a basic level. So that was brought forward as well as a criterion number 4. 5 is the criterion the eligibility criterion that relates back to the most recent federal legislation. So at the time the business submits its application to the Agency of Commerce, the business has to demonstrate one of 2 things. Either A, that it has applied for the forgivable loans and grants made available through PPP, EIDL, Advance, or other COVID-19 related business financial assistance program created by or as modified by the Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2021, but was denied assistance because the business does not meet the eligibility criteria for any of those programs, or the business has not applied for any such assistance based on a determination by a financial institution or other participating lender, an attorney, an accountant, another qualified financial professional, that the business is not eligible for such assistance because the business does not meet the eligibility criteria for any program. So that's a lot of words to basically say we have this slate of programs that have been created or modified by that big Consolidated Appropriations Act, 5,000 pages long. It modified the PPP, it modified the EIDL program, it created the economic grant program for hard hit venues and nonprofit organizations, et cetera. It created new grants there. And we're saying, as a matter of this state funded program, you have to go and apply for those grants or federal loans, forgivable loans that are available pursuant to this most recent federal act, or you have to have a determination that you shouldn't apply because you're not eligible. And you have to demonstrate that to the agency.
How long is that program likely to be open and have money?
I believe by authorization of law, it runs to the end of March. And of course, it could be continued, but that's right now I believe March 31st is the go live period.
So if this bill doesn't get to the governor's desk, I mean, there might be a very narrow window, right, for people to meet this criteria. If they're, I mean, there's a lot of businesses out there probably who are just have been clueless, and and will through education will become aware of this program and are not eligible, but have not gone and talked to anybody per se, and now they're going to have to scurry around to meet subsection B here, or subsection A, and they may only have a week or two to do so. Is that correct?
It depends on when this passes. I can't speak for the commissioner. Obviously, she did testify that because, that bill passed back in December, they have been trying to do a significant amount of outreach to get, businesses aware of what's out there and in the application process otherwise. So it may be the case that a lot of businesses are already in that pipeline, but frankly, you'd have to hear from Commissioner Goldstein about the universe and the status of businesses as such.
I mean, if somebody, just to put a closure on this, looking at B on line 3, if this bill doesn't go through, and it hasn't yet, why, and someone didn't think they were eligible for the federal assistance, why would they be contacting a professional to find out about their eligibility or their ineligibility if there was no program here to apply for? So once we have a program, that sort of triggers their need to go do that, and they may only have a very short window in which to do that at that point.
Sure, it's a fair question. I think the tension in B that at least the House was faced with was, if we're gonna try to capture the universe of people who aren't eligible for federal assistance, let's make that the population first. But then, who is the onus on? Is it on the business to go out and either apply and get rejected, or figure out on their own first whether they are eligible, or is the onus on the agency for all comers to come in the door, and then the agency can decide? And the combination of the criterion in subdivision B plus money for technical assistance and administration above kind of tries to, split the baby and put most of the onus on businesses, but allow the agency to provide some assistance. Does that help with your timing issue? I don't know that it does.
Okay.
Shall I move to 6?
Yep.
So 6 was added by House Appropriations. This is the one piece that I mentioned. And so to be eligible, the business has to be in compliance with current state health and safety protocols established by executive order.
Just so members of the committee who might not know that, but Mary Hooper used to be the commissioner of, I can't remember whether it was Labor and Industry, I think it was called at that point. Not surprised to see this inserted.
I see Joan is here. Okay, I can keep going if you'd like. C is the amount of the grant. So the grants shall not exceed the lesser of 3 times fixed monthly expenses for mortgage or rent, insurance, electricity, heat, water, sewer service, telecom service, and internet service, or $150,000. And it's the lesser of those two.
Could I go ahead, sorry.
Oh, I heard your question earlier about whether the amount is actually limited or tied to demonstrated need or anything like that. And the answer is not specifically here, no. Certainly the agency could, adopt guidelines to address the question, but the statute itself just says the maximum amount of grant is 3 months or 150, whichever is less.
So let me just interrupt for a question I wanted to ask the representatives who are still with us. I've heard background a bunch about this. There was a brewery that was trying to start up. I think it may have been in Essex. I don't know. That didn't. Yes. I don't know if it started up or what happened, but do you have a feel for what, in their case, what 3 times those fixed monthly expenses would be? What kind of grant they might qualify, or would they bump up against 150,000?
So we did hear from Black Flannel Brewery and the owner there who had a long planned opening for a pretty substantial facility. So it invested a lot of money and was able to open and operate, but not to the extent that they had planned. So we don't know what their fixed operating expenses are. We know that the size of the investment is, in the 7 figures, a multiple thereof, and that they had, I believe, 30 employees, and have had to kind of ebb and flow their staff because of their ability to operate. So in their case, it's an interesting question. Would they qualify? They have to show that financial loss because they opened in 2020. So they still have to show that because it could be that they just didn't meet their expectations. And in this program, that's not enough.
Okay. Well, I appreciate that answer. I was just trying to get a feel for what, the average, some businesses out there, small business with their maximum grant would be under this 3 times monthly expenses. I assume, I don't know what rent is. Is it $1,000 a month? Is it $10,000 a month? All these other ancillary things, half of what the rent is. I'm just trying to get a feel for the, the average grant that would go out here, or I guess that's an unanswerable question at this point.
Yeah, we don't really have the data on it. Yeah.
Okay. Sorry. Thank you for that. David, could you continue on?
Sure. So the next piece, subsection D, grant administration and priorities. So again, bear in mind above, we talked about eligibility criteria, right? What businesses are in the universe of an eligible population? But once we've defined that universe, once everybody who is eligible is in the door, the next question became, who gets the money first? What are the priorities? How does that look? And there's significant discussion about whether there should be multiple rounds of funding, or a first come first serve, or a priority window at the beginning and then something else. And the protocol that's set up here, you'll see in D1, beginning on the date the agency begins accepting applications for an initial 30-day period, the agency can accept applications from eligible businesses, but shall award grants only to eligible businesses that have not received any COVID-19 related assistance from state or federal sources. So again, this is the people who have received nothing. And for 30 days, they're the only eligible businesses that can actually be awarded a grant. There's a question, is there any money left after 30 days? I don't know the answer to that. Maybe there is, maybe there's not. But if there is, then in D2, after that initial 30-day period, the agency will continue to accept application and award grants consistent with the following. So, the words really matter here. So after that initial 30-day period, we have open season, but under A, the agency shall give first priority to eligible businesses that haven't received anything. So those businesses continue to get basic, first priority, all things being equal. If you've received nothing, even after this 30 days, you're still first priority. And then after that, under B, the agency may exercise its discretion to give subsequent priority to eligible businesses based on whether and the extent to which the business 1 through 6. So I just want to say that back to you again in plain English. First 30 days, awards only go to eligible businesses who have received no assistance. And then after that 30 days, the agency has to continue giving priority to businesses who have received no assistance. And then it may exercise discretion to come up with priority factors for subsequent grant awards. This list is not in order of, requirement. They could give more weight to, businesses that are the primary source of income for a household. They could give more weight to people who have suffered an operating loss. They could change the weight over time. They have the sort of the administrative discretion to decide how those subsequent priority factors will work. But this is the list. These are the 6 things that they can use to attach priority to subsequent grants. Any questions on that?
We're going to have to move along, but I guess I do. My interest is piqued. The following question in terms of simplicity here. We have several federal programs to help small business. We've had several state programs to help small businesses. We're telling in this program that you have to exhaust those or try to exhaust those first before you come to us for this money. Why don't we just say, if you've got any money from those programs, you can't qualify for this program, and just end it right there? We're trying to fill the gap. There's been several opportunities and programs along the way. Why all this complication of, is there an effort to like supplement other programs that have not given enough at this point? Is that the goal here? Why don't, we're setting up yet a program of last resort, and we're checking all the boxes. And then after we do that, we're saying, and if you haven't spent the $10 million, we can start giving money to other programs that have received some federal or state dollars before. Mike, do you want to try and answer that?
Sure. We heard testimony from businesses that had received some help, but it was very de minimis. PPP was on their payroll. They received $1,000, and that's all they received, and that's all they're eligible for. Also, EIDL received very little money on EIDL. Didn't receive any state grants. So there are some out there that have received a little bit of money, but not enough that it really made a difference in their ability to continue to go forward.
Okay. Well, I just as a thought, maybe another alternative, if that's the answer, is we sort of try and define what de minimis is and let those people in, as opposed to this whole laundry list of who then qualifies. But anyhow, that's for a later date. And can we just zip through C quickly, David, and move on to our following witnesses? Thank you.
Yeah, so 2 pieces left that closely track S350 as modified. So they have 10 days from effective date to publish guidelines on implementation. So application award procedures, standards about primary place of business, standards for grant use, ensure grant funds comply with the requirements here, procedures to protect, detect, mitigate fraud, waste, error, abuse, and procedures to ensure grant applicants comply with employment and labor laws. Most of those verbatim from S350. The reporting is for 2 reports. An initial report after the 30-day approval period expires, and then a final report 30 days after the program funds are extinguished. That's it.
Okay. I want to thank everybody. As usual, we're running late. That's what happens. So I'm going to thank especially the representatives for being with us for so long. And we will be talking more about this for sure, maybe even this morning. So thank you, Mike and Charlie.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, next on our agenda, I think is Brownfields. Is that correct? Senator Clark said, is Brownfields next on our agenda?
Gus Seelig is next on.
Oh, Gus Seelig, I'm sorry. Okay, we may have to schedule more time, obviously, Why don't we do Gus and Joan? I think given that we're going to quit at about 25 minutes, you don't necessarily need to stick around. We'll figure out a time maybe tomorrow when you're available to talk about brownfields and also these additional business grants. I think, according to David, it sounds like the House will be sending this bill to us as early as Thursday or Friday. I doubt that we're going to move it before the break, so we will figure out a time to finalize our recommendations
Okay.
with due diligence. Thank you. So Gus. Hi, Gus. How are you?
I'm just fine, Mr. Chairman. How are you today?
Good. Can I
Thanks.
start off? Everybody knows you. Can I start off with, I had heard a rumor that $10 million of your $20 million has been advanced in this new bill by the House. Is that true?
Not quite, as I understand it, and I haven't had a full discussion with the committee about it. They have put $10 million of CRF funding in the new bill as of yesterday. CRF, as you'll recall, can only be used to house homeless folks, which is the funding you provided to us last summer, for which we stood up just about 250 apartments and assisted a dozen shelters. My understanding, but I haven't had this discussion with the committee chair. I think Jen spoke with the person who has our section of the budget, is that this is not part of the 20 million the governor has proposed advancing us in general fund. It's just their desire to deal with the fact that more than 1,900 households are still in motels, and they're looking to us to provide the conversion of some more properties to housing to reduce the census in those hotels.
Okay, that clarifies things greatly, but it also raises another question. So isn't there money that could be used for this purpose in the ERAU, whatever that program is, the $200 million program that was advanced by the Joint Fiscal Committee, at least I think millions already for homelessness.
So my understanding of the rental assistance dollars the state has is that they cannot be used for capital costs. They can only be used for rental assistance. And when I talked to Sarah Phillips this weekend, Mr. Chairman, what she said to me was that they've issued rental vouchers to several hundred folks in motels who cannot find any housing. So I think AHS understands, and I think this has been consistent with our testimony in the past. We have many markets in Vermont where we really have a shortage of housing supply. Means that even when somebody is provided rental assistance, they cannot find a place to rent. And so I think that was why the House took the action that they took. There may be in the next package of federal assistance some money for capital, but it's not clear to us yet how much there'll be for Vermont.
So the $10 million I originally asked about is essentially a continuation of CRF funding.
Correct.
For buying
Yeah.
motels or rehabilitating motels to house the homeless.
Yeah, or other properties. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. So given now getting back to why you're here today, what else can we advance in one-time monies? This whole dialogue or exercise is about if we know that it is likely that your one-time money suggested by the governor to be put in the budget bill is going to happen, and we don't know that for sure, and some people may disagree with that. But if we assume that it is there any of those monies that could benefit by getting out 3 months earlier than if it was in the budget bill?
Okay. So what I've told your colleagues in the Appropriations Committee and what I've told the House members is there's probably a couple of projects that would get going a little faster if monies were in this bill, but they likely will proceed apace even and get started in the coming year, whether you advance them in the bill or not. So there are some applications coming to us that I know could have starts in the summer or fall. The, the two bodies put different questions to me, and the question in the other body was, if we advance money now, would you get anything going in this calendar year? And the answer to that would be definitely yes. There would be some things that would move ahead. But is it absolutely essential that those projects move in this bill as opposed to the next bill? It is not. But it will not hurt anything, and indeed send a signal to all of our partners that there's likely to be more dollars coming and get people working on potential projects all over the state.
Well, I guess I would rephrase the question, not is it essential, but is it beneficial to move some ones earlier?
Yeah, it is always helpful.
Okay.
It is always helpful, but I'm saying that in the context that I don't yet have these applications in hand. I have not seen signed purchase and sales agreements, so I'm being at least a little bit of speculative, but absolutely, would it be essential to advance money at this point? Sure.
Can you get back to us with I know it's hard, but a ballpark figure as to what might be beneficial? I mean, as you say, what I'm struggling with is what's the harm? You know,
There's zero harm. I think that the appropriators don't want to get ahead of, as we are all struggling to understand what federal resources are coming and what's the best use of each dollar. People just didn't want to get ahead of themselves. I think I could say to you that, if you advance 3 to 5 million of the 20 million, there will be absolutely no harm, and it'll let us immediately, close to immediately, say yes to a couple of applications that I expect we'll have in hand in a few weeks.
what was the number you said? I missed that.
I said in the $3 to $5 million range.
Okay. And I would think also that there could be some qualifying language accompanying that can deal with what ifs on the federal level. So, could be clawbacks or, requiring you to hold that. Okay, that's helpful. You are obviously.
Sorry, Michael, on that, may I just tag on a question?
Absolutely.
And Gus, you said that that you said yes to the House, that there were things you could move on quickly in FY21. So that's before July. And does that correlate to the 3 to 5 million, that you have yesable projects in the $3 to $5 million range before FY21?
I think there are any number of activities that we're likely to get applications on for our May and June board meetings that we'll be able to get going. And there's a number of initiatives. The governor spoke to the need for home ownership, and that's a program we have in place that we can add dollars to and we're out of those dollars, I think, now, and get those dollars in place as the new selling season comes in. It's a subsidy to help people buy homes, along with all the other work that we do on multifamily housing and working with the shelter providers. And as you know, Senator Clarkson, I don't have applications in hand. Two of the places we did not have a big impact with CRF was in the Upper Valley and in the Barry area, and both of the shelter providers in those areas are working on alternatives. They're not in hand yet, but we certainly want to help them when they're ready to proceed.
Yep, clear on that. Thanks.
So your history, your longevity Wood This Work is well respected and well known. And I did ask a few days ago if you had other potential ideas in housing that could be advanced in this bill. We heard, and I think you endorsed the idea of the Vermont Housing Finance Agency continuing their mortgage assistance program. We had some great testimony this morning for more. Could you talk about that a little bit and any other thoughts you might have?
Well, I guess I would just say, fundamental to what the legislature did was to try to keep people housed and not have more people become homeless with a variety of tools. And it makes very little difference, I think, whether somebody whose income is half of the median and below, whether they are a renter or a homeowner, but that's who was targeted. And so it strikes me that if somebody is economically on the margin and owns their home, uh, and there's been great success at avoiding arrearages and having people default on their mortgages, that's an effort worthy of keeping in place, because those folks may not be quite as vulnerable as a renter. On the other hand, if they fall into financial trouble, then if you're foreclosed upon, it is years before you can qualify for a mortgage ever again. So I think that's absolutely a wonderful preventative effort that is consistent with all the other efforts that the General Assembly's made over this last year since the pandemic began. So I'd be quite supportive of you continuing that effort. I understand there'll be some support for that in the next federal package. And so I can't tell you whether you've got to provide the dollars right away, but I think as you just suggested in terms of our programs, what would be the harm in providing some help right away? So I think that's a worthy thing to do.
Well, the one harm we were fearful of is that if we put the state dollars out and the federal money came in, we wouldn't be able to reimburse the state. But we've learned that what's being proposed is that the state could be fully reimbursed for any money they fronted in that area. So really, at this point, there would be very little harm.
Yeah.
Could you talk a little bit about mobile homes? This committee has spent a fair amount of time talking about mobile homes. Is there anything that could be done right now for the mobile home parks and for homeowners there?
Well, I would say two things. One is if it's not clear that they're eligible for rental assistance because they do rent their lots, that would be an important thing to do. We actually had commissioned a study last year on the condition of mobile home parks, and a few things that we found in it. One is that lots of folks have aged in place. The housing stock is older than it was 25 years ago in general, and the infrastructure has all gotten older. And we've actually talked with the congressional delegation recently about when they address the issue of infrastructure that they need to be focused on both connecting mobile home parks to public infrastructure, but also treating the infrastructure in parks as something that is eligible for assistance. The largest cooperative park in the state is in Senator Ballant's district. We've made a grant to help them do some planning work, but that's going to have huge needs when they come up with a financial plan. They actually have 40 homes that are not in the floodplain, but in the floodway and have flooded and need to be moved, and those people relocated. So there are big issues in the world of mobile home parks. As you consider all the initiatives that the governor has put in front of you, one of the issues in mobile home parks is there are sometimes abandoned homes, which really are an environmental hazard and what somebody might call an attractive nuisance, has an impact negatively on surrounding homes. I don't know whether it would be appropriate, but I would look at whether some of the Brownfields money that will be funded by the state rather than the feds could be used as a fund to help remove those derelict homes and get them to the landfills as a way to clean up parks. So that may be something that, as you're working on the variety of proposals that have been put in front of you, you can provide assistance to do.
Yeah,
So those are a few ideas. We could have a very long discussion just on mobile home parks and their variety of needs in the parks.
we could. We have like a couple of minutes left. I guess I just want you to narrow or refine your comments on mobile home parks to the question at hand of, is there any money that could benefit from being advanced by 3 months in a mobile home initiative?
I guess if you're advancing the brownfield dollars early and you want to make the cleanup of, derelict homes a piece of the work that could be done under that definition, that might be something to consider.
Would that save us a season, like the shovel-ready construction? That's what we're hearing, that those 3 months may make a difference in avoiding having to wait until 2022 to do something? Or is it just a matter, they'll just have that site cleaner 3 months earlier?
I'm not sure. I don't think I have enough knowledge to say that it absolutely needs to be in a bill. If you're looking for things, I would say that having a fund to help owners remove derelict homes, which I think costs something in excess of $5,000 to move them, get them in the landfill, clean up the site, is an important way to address those needs. But I don't think I can speak to with any authority to the timing issue.
Okay. Does anybody else have questions? Senator Clarkson?
Yeah, I'm just a little concerned about anything that would reduce the amount we have for brownfields, because we so rarely have money for brownfields, and it's great use of one-time money. And I think coming from the feds, we're going to have more help on mobile home parks, and I would be reluctant to have any money erode what has been identified for brownfields. That's, I guess, my concern here.
Yeah,
That's a policy question for the budget bill. So,
Well,
okay.
Ross here. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, one other issue that has just come up, and I think state funding is different from federal funding and provides opportunities for more flexibility. As we look at housing issues beyond mobile home parks, if we were to define, the removal of asbestos as something eligible for brownfield funding, that's also something that would help our housing work writ large, that the feds do not recognize. So that may be a way to creatively use state funds to deal with a significant issue, but again, not a fast track issue necessarily. And knowing you want to move on because you've been behind in schedule, Mr. Chairman, I guess the only other thoughts I have, and these are not necessarily to the urgency issue, but we have the whole issue of connectivity, because there's money around Wi-Fi. We have had a number of providers provide free Wi-Fi to residents. In a 30-unit building, there's about a $10,000 expense to that. So that may be, again, a way to be very proactive in providing more access and more equitability, whether it is people looking for jobs, telemedicine, and so on. On average, our renters, I think the median income is a little over $20,000 in the developments we've supported. So Wi-Fi becomes a major expense. And if we can focus on a way to provide folks with free Wi-Fi on a building-wide basis, that may be something, again, not necessarily a fast track issue, but an issue for a later time. And as you're looking at how you work on weatherization and climate, similarly, we're being pushed, and it's a good push from a climate perspective, to make buildings all electric, and providing more support for PV would be another thing that might be on your list, though not necessarily on your fast track list.
Okay. Good. Gus, you never miss an opportunity to sell all the good stuff for housing when you have an opportunity. So I appreciate that. I did ask you the question though. Okay, so thank you all. We'll see you some in this afternoon, if not tomorrow morning at 8:30.